Smile.
Before we begin, I want to remind everybody attending this evening's meeting in person that this meeting is being recorded and that the room is equipped with microphones throughout that will pick up any talking. Please refrain from having sidebar discussions that you do not wish for the microphones to record. I'd like to call the order of the study session of July 8th, 2024 at 6 p.m. And on our study session, we have one item, and it is 2024 Comprehensive Plan Update, Overview, and Selection of Preferred Alternative. I call on Senior Planner Ann Siegenthaler.
Thank you.
Actually, Mayor, can you just state on the record that all council members are present?
And all council members are present. Nice work, guys.
Good evening, council members. I'm Ann Siegenthaler, Senior Planner with Community Development, Community and Economic Development. Can you all hear me?
Not very well.
So you won't have a mic, Ann, you gotta speak up. Cause the mic's up in the ceiling.
Okay. I have to look up and talk.
Yeah.
So thank you all for being here on this hot night. So this is our first council discussion of the 2024 Comprehensive Plan Update. There'll be a lot more information coming to you later in future months. We're still working with the Planning Commission right now. But tonight, I wanted to give you an overview of the process and get some feedback from the council on our preferred alternative. So I have a presentation I'll show you. Mr. Steffens, am I able to share my screen?
Should be able to.
I don't know. Very, that's why, yeah. Bear with me here. There we go. Can everyone see that?
Sure.
There it is.
There it is.
There we are. Sorry about that. Okay, so again, it's the an update to the Sumner Comprehensive Plan. And the goals for our meeting tonight, I'd like to give you a brief overview of the process and the timeline, and also ask the council for direction on what we are calling the preferred alternative, and I'll explain that in more detail. So first of all, why are we doing this update? Well, it's the Growth Management Act that requires us to do this, and every 10 years, we are required to go through an extensive, what we call a 10-year periodic update. And ours in Sumner is due this year 2024 by the end of December. And so what that means is it means pretty much an overhaul of the comprehensive plan and updates to different development regulations. And as you all are probably aware, there's also some new state legislation related to housing and increased density and accessory dwelling units. And so part of this update requires us to incorporate new legislative measures into this comp plan. So the body of work consists of the comprehensive plan itself, some updates to our regulations. There will be 3 areas that we'll have updates to. And it includes an environmental impact statement and a capital facilities plan and a new transportation management plan. And it also includes an extensive body of public outreach that we started a year ago. And I'll go through more of these. So the comprehensive plan, what is that? That is basically Sumner's roadmap. It's our vision for the future. Describes how we'll live, work, get around, grow over the long term. And it contains our community's goals and policies about land use, transportation, housing, and so on. And the way the process works is the Planning Commission is actually the caretaker, if you will, of the Sumner Comprehensive Plan. In our code, they're charged with maintaining the comprehensive plan and recommending regulations to implement the comprehensive plan. And then they're advisory to the city council. So they go through their process and they make recommendations such as, we recommend the city council adopt XYZ. So that's the commission's role. What is the comprehensive plan going to include? And you'll be seeing all this later on, so you'll have lots of reading to do. It involves these 18 elements, so you can see the range of issues. Each of these are chapters, if you will, in the comprehensive plan. And we'll have updates to all of those. Most of them are just tech edits, kind of clean up, updating some old terms. But there are some significant changes when it comes to housing and land use, our historic cultural resources element, and our environmental element in our critical areas code. The other aspect of this comprehensive plan update I mentioned is public outreach. That's a big part of it. And the state requires us to do public outreach. And because it's a 10-year periodic update, we've done a little more this time than our usual updates. Our Sumner Connects webpage, you're all familiar with that? You've seen it. That's our primary source of information for this project. We started posting information to that back in January of 2023. That's when the council first opened up this process to accept potential private proposals for the update. So since 2023, January 2023, we've been using Sumner Connects. And as we go through the process, Sumner Connects is where planning commission packets are posted, the draft environmental impact statement, and so on. And today we've had 1,800 visits to Sumner Connects, which is pretty good. And over 46% of our visitors were informed, which means they actually clicked on something, downloaded, and read something. So that's a pretty good statistic. And we also have a function in Sumner Connects where the pages do translate to different languages. So we tried to pay more attention this time to accessibility issues for these various outreach products. So the other types of outreach we did, we frequently had short articles in our city e-news and in our social media posts. We had the city letter, which you've all seen delivered to your doorstep quarterly. And we also prepared some flyers and mailed those directly. And we also handed those out to various agencies and community events. So people had a brief summary of what was proposed, and then everything had a link back to the Sumner Connects website where they could get more information. And then we also had open houses, several of those, and had some good questions at our open houses. And then in addition to those outreach efforts, we also had our public meetings and our hearing notices through the Planning Commission. In addition to those specific outreach events, we also had several community events where representatives from the city attended these events and talked to people about their concerns and issues in the community. What do they see? Those three questions. What do they see happening? What do they not like happening? And did they have any suggestions for what could be better? So we had flyers out at these events as well, and we got general feedback from different community members, including youth, which is always great. So that's kind of an overview of the process, and then the timeline is laid out here. We started in January. We moved through the draft comprehensive plan and draft environmental impact statement. Those were issued in March of 24. The Planning Commission held a public hearing on April 4th of this year. And the commission is still continuing their review, June through September. And the council study sessions will start probably September, October of this year. And we're anticipating that October, November, the city council will have also their public hearing. So we'll have two public hearings, and one with you and the one with you again in the fall. And then probably deliberation and adoption in November, December, so we can try to hit that December 31st deadline. So that's the overview. And now to the second meeting goal, I'd like to talk to the council about what we call our preferred alternative and get council feedback on that. Excuse me. We have an environmental impact statement that lays out 3 alternative approaches to primarily how we approach housing, different strategies to meet our housing targets, our growth targets. And out of those 3 alternatives in the environmental impact statement, the Planning Commission reviewed those and came up with a preferred alternative. And so what I want to review with the council is what the Planning Commission recommended as the preferred alternative, and see if you are comfortable with proceeding with that. Because that will then, the preferred alternative will drive the final environmental impact statement and the analysis that goes into that final document. It will drive the final policies and the final development regulations to come out as a final comprehensive plan. Any questions on the process so far? Okay. So now to the preferred alternative. All of these alternatives, except the no action alternative, meet state and regional requirement. That's our mandate from the state. And our preferred alternative plans for required growth targets of 1985 housing units, 5,300 jobs, and 4,900 residents. And these numbers actually come from the state. They start kind of high at the state level and then get filtered down through countywide discussions, and then in Pierce County, and then finally amongst all the cities who discuss these growth targets. And so we participated in these growth target assignments. And the targets are assigned. There are several characteristics that the state and the county looks at to determine what each city needs to accept for their targets. And a lot of that's based on the city size, the buildable lands, what your capacity is for accepting growth, and whether or not you have a high transit center. And this is what you've probably all heard. We have a state mandate that requires us to allow 2 dwelling units per lot now. And we're also required to allow 2 accessory dwelling units per lot. And so this alternative just fills in that mandate and puts that into our code as a direct response to the state. We also, in our preferred alternative, meet our housing targets. So these housing targets get pretty specific. Not only are we assigned these housing targets, say housing units, 1,985 housing units, we have to assign those to different income bands. That's totally new now than what we used to do in the past with comprehensive plans. So those targets have been assigned to Sumner, and we're required to plan for, we're not required to actually have or create as the city, but we're required to plan for, make sure we have zoning in place and so forth to accommodate affordable housing in these different income bands. And this is a question that's often asked is what is affordable? And in terms of the state definition, it actually means for households making less than 80% of the area median income in Pierce County. So it's different for different counties. And it's different for different cities in the county, as you might imagine. So it's interesting, in Sumner, the household median income is 83,000. In Pierce County, it's 91,000. And approximately 54% of our renter households here in Sumner and 28% of our owners here have incomes below this area median. So this is not something that we're addressing that's happening somewhere else. This is in Sumner, where there's already an identified need for affordable housing units. And these are just the numbers down here, if you're interested, and these are the different income bands. So as you can see, everything from 50 to 80%, 30 to 50, everything from here down is considered affordable. And those are a lot of units that Sumner needs to try to provide. So it's a very challenging prospect for us. And other cities are facing this big challenge as well.
Are there any questions on that before she moves forward? Okay. Go ahead.
I was just curious, Ann, on the comp plan, I know that when something happens that we want to be flexible on policy and we want to make a policy and it's different than the comp plan, that can cause problems for us, right? So we have to go back and do an amendment. So some of these things, these changes, I was just curious in general, and maybe I can save this for the end if you want, but I'm trying to figure out, is there a way to add something into this comp plan amendment or this update to allow flexibility if some of the state mandates change or something goes away in the future or something changes, so if we're founding a lot of these new policies like the ADUs and the 2 units per acre, and a lot of these rules are very specific and there's quite a lot of things. Is there a way if the state law changes to make it less strict, do we have the ability to create a comprehensive plan that allows us the flexibility of saying, hey, we don't have to go and do a full amendment on the comp plan to go back to what we were before?
Yes.
There is some vehicle for that, because I just wanted to make sure that was part of the discussion.
Yes, and the council has the option to update the comprehensive plan every couple of years. We don't have to wait for a big 10-year update. And so if in a couple of years, the council sees changes in the community or changes in the state legislation that require a different approach, and this could even mean, let's say, a different approach to something in our development regulations. Let's say we adopt new development regulations, something changes and we learn that the development regulations could be better, or they aren't, maybe they're too stringent. So we have the council has the option to go back and be a little more nimble when you see changes with the state and also in the community.
So if we were to, say somehow in like 2 years, all of a sudden electric cars are just considered stupid and we have hydrogen cars or something that's like better. And we have in our comp plan, we have everything written down with the state mandated electric cars and all the dates and all the things and it's all over the code in electric cars. And all of a sudden that's dumb and the new technology comes out. Are we having to change the whole comp plan, or can we just, is it really is there a quicker process we can put in place? Because I feel like things have changed. Is it still the longer, lengthier process?
It's going to really depend on the topic and where that topic is addressed in the comprehensive plan. So let's say with electric vehicles, it probably would require a full comprehensive plan update because I think that term is used in a lot of areas, but maybe just in the environment area, maybe in the transportation chapter. So it's not going to be this huge, I wouldn't think, 2-year-long process, but it would require a regular comprehensive plan update. Now, I will say also that one of the things we've tried to do, and I know the Planning Commission tried to do this, staff and the consultants also tried to do this, is to be a little bit flexible, just for this very reason that you're mentioning, Mr. Elvers, too, so that if the state says you have to accommodate plan for alternative fuel vehicles, well, instead of saying electric vehicles, we might say vehicles that use alternative fuels, because you're right, there's hydrogen. cells, there's all kinds of different ways of approaching that. So I won't say we've been successful throughout the comp plan, trying to find some generic term. Because the state's also looking over our shoulders saying they're doing a word search, I think. Where's that word? Where's that EV term? But yes, we'll have the ability to go back and respond and change things. And if there's something specific you see as we move through this process that you would like to have a little more flexibility on in terms of the language, certainly bring that up. We could look at that. As long as we're within that range of meeting what the state tells us we have to do, then that's what we'd like to do, is have some local flexibility.
I have a question here.
You have a question?
Yeah, real quick, just looking at this chart, it looks like, so this is a 20-year projection to 2044,
Yes.
2024. And we want to have, just the one I'm looking at now, 1,985 homes and some there in the next 20 years.
Yeah.
And I guess my question is, and the same for the 5,300 jobs and 4,900 residents. What happens if you don't meet those requirements? I mean, is there a penalty? Is there? Oh, that's all right. I can do that. I was just curious if, let's say we only get 1,500 homes.
Yeah.
built.
There could be potentially some sanctions. We have to show a good faith effort. We have to show that we've implemented policies and development regulations to move that needle toward these housing and employment targets. Now, with our manufacturing industrial center, we probably are not going to have an issue with meeting those jobs. It's really the concern is always the number of housing units and the affordable housing units. We very likely will meet the 1,985 housing units because we've got a lot of units coming in the pipeline. We'll probably be close with our existing zoning. But it's the affordable units, it's those, sorry, let me get back to that. It's these units in this area, below 80% and below have trouble. So the state could have sanctions and withhold grant money. I don't know the range of options they have, but they do have a hammer. And we also have other agencies that have authority to review our comprehensive plan, including our transportation plan. So the regional authority that certifies our transportation plan that allows us to go get grants and our federal funding, state funding for some of our big transportation projects. We may not qualify for some of that funding if our comprehensive plan is out of compliance with the state guidelines. Now, go ahead, Brendan.
I was just gonna say, so we are required to demonstrate that we've gone through the planning process and that we have capacity for this growth. And that's part of what we've been tasked with, and that's part of what we demonstrate when we go into all the details. The cities basically lays the groundwork for housing to be built. We don't build housing, right? We can't guarantee that the market's going to be right, financing is going to be right, and we're going to get all those units built. But what we can demonstrate is we're meeting state law. We're going to be talking about permit timelines here in the next few months. That we're doing what we can to facilitate that housing being built. But they can't really hold us to it actually getting built because we don't build housing. We only create opportunity for that.
Yeah,
My other question was on the ADUs. Does that go towards that 1985? Let's say.
Yep, that's been calced in. As we looked at the capacity, our consultants have modeled that and made some assumptions as to how many those might get built.
and I might also add that for some of these lower, when you get to the very low income households, most cities are going to have to rely on agency providers. And that's just a wild card. We don't know. We have to plan for these, try to do the best we can, but other agencies are going to have to step into the various communities and start looking at land banking and acquisition and start looking at how to build some of these very low income.
Just one more statement, then a question actually for you. This type of housing allocation is new, right? So there's a lot of unknowns how this is really gonna play out. This is new legislation that this is the first comp plan that we're doing and our neighbors are doing that has this type of allocation. So it'll be really interesting to see how it comes out. And then Ann or Ryan, can you clarify the units that are currently in the permit pipeline that aren't necessarily coming out of the ground yet? Do they count towards the 1,985?
Yes.
Okay.
But they won't, but they are considered market rate, everything. So the projects you see in East Sumner, those are all market rate, the new projects coming in Town Center. So they won't count toward our lower income bands. Ryan, do you want to clarify anything in that?
Which do we talk about that creates an issue? I mean, we have another 1,000 units that we actually need to be planning for in order to meet the income bands. Because the approximately 800 units that are coming are mostly market rate. So it creates, in order to meet the numbers we need to be able to show in this chart, we actually have to bump that 1985 up to 3,000. And
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
consultant might be better at explaining kind of the math that went into that.
Yeah, it's kind of, maybe it's getting down in the weeds a little too much, but one of the reasons we work with a consultant who does these kinds of plans for different cities and jurisdictions, they've run all the numbers, and so they're looking at how do we meet that 1,985? How do we meet these income bands? And so we may have to accommodate more homes than the 1985 because we'll meet the 1985, so we'll be in compliance. But it's fine tuning the strategies to meet those lower income bands. So that's what's going to be really difficult. Did that get more confusing?
Yeah, I wasn't trying to add to the confusion. I was really just trying to say that the ones that are being built right now are being counted towards
Yes.
these numbers.
Yeah.
But it sways them too much to the affordability side,
Yes.
which is going to cause a deficit eventually.
Mhm.
It's gonna cause an overbuilding of market rate and short us probably on the affordable.
That's right. That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
So what does PSH mean? I've been trying to find the,
Oh,
Stands for permanent
Sorry.
supportive housing.
oh, okay.
So that
So
means,
that's
so
with
the
outside
PSH
agents.
housing, really, once you get below 80% AMI, and especially when you get down to the 30 and below 50%, much of that is going to be permanently or subsidized by a governmental entity in order for it to be affordable. Section 8 housing or some other form of affordable housing for it to be affordable to those income.
and it also, the nuance there is also permanent support. It means it implies there's usually some agency oversight for people who need some monitoring, supervision, that kind of thing. But every city is required to accommodate a certain number of those permanent supportive housing units.
So do we have any in the city now?
I'm not aware of any.
Because of providers, right?
Yeah, we have, what's the number? I think it's around 200 affordable, like permanently affordable housing units in the community already.
Supportive
Yeah,
housing.
it's supported
okay.
in one way or another.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So I am curious, about the affordable housing. So I read through the presentation. You just mentioned that maybe it's going to be agency providers who are there to provide the low income housing. And I think the presentation said something about the mobile home lots, preserving them or something. And that's only two alternatives. And so is that it? Because I read the other, like I'm familiar with relocation assistance and all of that, and I understand why that would be a little challenging. But to me, there are just two ways that we're going to be working on affordable housing or try to make, meet that, that number. So.
Yes, I think that's a good point, and that's the challenge that cities have as cities. We're not housing providers. We are doing some other things. For example, we participate in SHAPE, the South Sound Housing.
affordability program.
So as an agency, we can support other agencies that provide housing. We've got one or two policies that we're proposing that encourage the city to look at city-owned properties for potentially land banking for sale to low-income housing providers. So there are a few items, but nothing huge that is kind of the straight path to providing this many affordable units. But if the council through this process sees something that we're missing, then that's something that we should look at and see if there's another way or something else we can add. There's a list of a range of options that cities have for addressing affordable housing. And the process that staff went through with the consultants and with the commission was trying to decide, well, what's realistic for the city? Us, as City of Sumner being a smaller city, we don't have the resources that say Tacoma has or Seattle. We don't have a housing ombudsman department that promotes affordable housing or funds. Rehab gives out low income or low interest loans to low income. There are a lot of other ways an agency can address low income housing, but we felt that the city of Sumner, with our resources, we didn't have that many options.
Yes, I would agree with that. And my thought really initially was that grants, but there are low income loans or low interest rate loans. So
Yeah, and other cities do that, and they provide these housing rehab loans and the energy retrofits, because of course that's a huge cost for low income households. And you think about it on days like this. But the council has all of those options open to you. If there is some other option that we missed and you'd like to pursue, we can.
thank you.
Anybody else? Go ahead.
So as we discussed, we have to plan for and accommodate affordable housing. And that's the key term. They're planned for and accommodate, as Ryan said, we don't have to build it because we're a city, but we have to plan for it. And the preferred alternative tries to address affordable housing in some different ways. We are proposing to provide voluntary incentives for affordable housing. There's a couple different ways that we're providing incentives, which I'll get to in a minute. We did discuss with the Planning Commission having mandatory affordability requirements, requiring that, for example, every new housing apartment project that comes in has to have at least 20% of the units, or you can't build in Sumner. We talked about that as a mandatory affordability option, and we determined that there is a risk where mandatory could shut down all of the new housing projects, the mixed use projects coming in. And then we would have nothing. We wouldn't be close at all to meeting any of our targets. Another strategy to address affordable housing is we're proposing to increase the density allowed in certain areas. And increasing density, it's difficult for communities to accept that, but it does provide more opportunities to build housing stock. And so we have just a few areas and a few instances we're suggesting increased density. The proposal is also supporting affordable housing by religious organizations by giving them density bonuses and other incentives. So we do this now in our code for affordable senior housing. They go through a permit process that takes them to a hearing examiner for a public hearing, and they can ask for density bonus, a height increase, a number of different incentives that can make it more affordable for them to build these types of projects. And we're also proposing to expand the use of the multifamily tax exemption in Town Center and East Sumner. So I'll go into some of these in a little more detail. The multifamily tax exemption, I think the council has seen this before, and maybe not all of you. If you're not familiar with it, the multifamily tax exemption, MFTE, it's a property tax credit and it creates an incentive. And cities use this all over the place, and it can create quite a great incentive for development. And you can use it to incentivize development in certain areas like we did with Town Center, or you can use it to incentivize a certain type of housing like affordable housing. And that's entirely, there's a range of options the council has. That's a tax credit the council would be giving to developers to build in Sumner. What we're proposing is to expand the MFTE in Town Center and also in East Sumner. So right now, Town Center has kind of a two-pronged approach. A developer can get an 8-year tax incentive by building market rate, because we wanted to bring developers into that area, or 12 years, a 12-year credit if 20% of the units are affordable. Right now, East Sumner allows 12 years of the tax credit if you build 20% affordable units. So in Town Center, the plan is, this is the Town Center boundary. And the plan here is to essentially take away the tax credit for market rate apartments and only offer it for apartments that are affordable. That's a big change, very big change, but that's what we discussed with the Planning Commission, and there was support for that. And just to give you an idea, this image here is the latest proposed Kincaid mixed use, or the Red Apple site. So that would give you an idea what we're talking about. This is a mixed use development, and there's a risk that developers who build this kind of project won't want to come and build in Town Center if we require it to be affordable. But that's the proposal. We're trying to move that needle a bit on affordable.
This doesn't affect that project though, right?
It could. And there's a way, this gets into some details, but there's a way that we can write a code if the council desires to maybe exempt certain projects or put a vesting date in, say, in the new MFTE code, we could say something like projects. This applies to any project that comes in for permits after December 31st, 2020, for example.
Or the developer could apply for the market rate MFTE exemption, and that would be basically, and you get a conditional vested, basically what that's under the current code, and still be able to pursue it as a market rate project.
Yeah.
So I know we adopted that tax exemption last year. How many developers have taken advantage of it?
So it was adopted, it was expanded to East Sumner. I
Yeah.
think you're
It's gonna-
referring to.
Move that up.
And we have one developer, Timberlane Development Partners, who took advantage of that. They built 162 units in East Sumner, and 33 of those are affordable to low and moderate income families. There's a picture of it there. They now call it the Sumner Mill project. So that's our, that's some success there. For being a small community and having that much success is great. the downside I would say is there's another 300 units or so that are coming. They'll all be market rate in the same MFTE area. Yeah, so there's developers that they kind of, they'll do MFTE, they'll do affordable, and they'll also look at other credits and incentives. And then, but that comes with a certain administrative burden because they have to report to the city every year who's in these units, what's their income, what's their rent. Then I report that to the state. So there's some disincentives in terms of administrative headache that they don't want to live with, especially if they have the option to get an 8-year market rate. Anyway, you can only do the MFTE for affordable housing in East Sumner.
And if I can elaborate on what Ryan was saying, so the slide here shows that we're proposing to expand. This is what you adopted in 2023.
2024 or 2022.
It was very recently.
Yeah, that's what we.
In the red boundary, and we're proposing to expand it to the entire East Sumner neighborhood boundary. And as Ryan mentioned, not all developers do affordable housing. Some won't even be attracted to build in this area because they don't do affordable housing. But others, it could be just enough to create that incentive. And they don't have to build all units as affordable. What's typical for most cities is to set the affordable minimum at 20% of the units. But there is an administrative burden that a lot of developers don't care for.
You guys just, for the public who might be listening and also for council might not be aware, the MFTE creates a zone, but it doesn't necessarily change the underlying zoning, correct?
That's correct.
Correct.
So if it's zoned, trying to think of a zone, neighborhood commercial, you can't put apartments in neighborhood commercial, correct?
Yeah, you can usually.
If it's mixed use or
It's
something.
mixed use for sure.
Yeah.
I'm over my skis here, giving you an example. What I'm trying to show is that if you can't put an apartment there now, you can't all of a sudden put an apartment there once the MFT expands.
That's correct.
Because the
Yeah,
underlying zoning still controls
Yeah.
what you can build
Correct.
there,
Yeah.
just the MFT.
That's
area
correct.
expands.
that's why, and I think that's a good point because when you look at this East Sumner boundary and we say, well, we'll expand this tax credit to all of these areas. When you start looking at, well, what's actually buildable over there? What has the zoning, as Mr. Wilson was saying, to accept apartments? And what is not full of wetlands and steep hillsides? And what's left over there that doesn't already have apartments? So our consultants looked at this and they've done some data. And so this is one, we know we could get some additional affordable units. Probably won't be a huge amount, but it's one more tool in this menu of options we have. We can use this option, we can grab from another option, and together it moves us forward to meeting those housing targets.
So with these tax exemption, how much does it impact our city coffers?
Well, it definitely would, and I think Ryan might have some
Well,
numbers.
That's a
on
good
that.
question. I'm gonna try to explain this.
I'll fill in where.
Taxes is not my forte, but
just take this one.
yeah, why don't you take that? Don't get it wrong. But it's good news. I can tell you that. It's somewhat good news based on previous conversations.
So what it does is, annually, council sets the tax rate for the upcoming year. And we can increase that by up to 1% over the amount that we collected the prior tax year. So what this does is it still levies the same amount, it just spreads it around. So even though, let's say for round numbers, the assessed value of the property was $2 million. And now you have improved it, and that improvement was valued at 20 million. So now you're looking at 22 million. that $20 million assessment just gets added to the overall tax roll, and it still just keeps you in that 1%. Nobody loses any money. It just gets spread out a little bit differently in a different manner.
So you're not really seeing a
No,
decrease in income.
you're not seeing a decrease in income. It's just the amount that that specific property is paying. They're only being assessed at the pre-improvement value.
And can I ask a follow-up
Sure.
quick? Does that have an impact to other property taxpayers?
Yes and no, because you're still only limited to the 1%.
Okay.
It impacts that.
Okay,
If I'm understanding right, 1% is 1% plus new construction. So the new construction is really spread between everyone. So you're getting
Exactly.
more than 1%.
That NCNI value of 20 million in my example gets spread out amongst the holder. The taxpayers.
anybody else?
Two questions. Number one, on the word affordable, it's been used in the code a lot, and now we have this spreadsheet with different categories of affordable. Are we going to use different terms? Because I feel like affordable 80% or less, or 80% was different than this the whole new one, which is the permanent supportive housing is significantly different in my opinion than just the normal. Are we gonna differentiate that? Because I feel like if you say there's a 20% of your housing is affordable, it's very different than saying 20% of your housing is permanent supportive housing. That's like, to me, that if the developer is saying, I'm gonna get those lower numbers, then you're asking a lot more of a developer. And if I was a developer, I would say, no, I'm not gonna go for those people because it's gonna really hurt me. So is there gonna be a split in the way the code's written, or is it too new?
Also, you want to answer that?
Well, just real quick, we have there, you're right, there have been different definitions of affordable housing. Now we have one from the state. And in fact, where this will translate is in our MFTE code, chapter 3.52, I think it is. There's a definition in there of affordable, and the South Sound Housing Agency asked us to look at that and make sure we're consistent with our affordability definition. So we'll have an affordable definition when we build a code that tells developers what affordable means, what those 20% units have to be. It'll be clear in that code.
Will there be flexibility for that 20% to be adjusted if it's like significantly affordable, like if it's a different level, like if it's lower on the tier?
No, it'll be anything at or below 80% of the area median income. That's the definition.
So
So if they end up on the high end or the low end, that's totally up to their development and the particular developer.
Yeah, so,
Go ahead, Brad.
yeah, for the MFTE to qualify, a low-income household, as Ann said, it's below 80% of the area median income. Moderate income household is more than 80%, but is at or below 115%. So the requirement is that they accommodate these two income bands, low income and moderate. So it's 80% or less for low, or 80 to 115% AMI for moderate. That's the rules for MFTE. So they could, I doubt a developer would build permanent supportive housing and say that's my contribution. They're gonna keep it as close to that 80% AMI as they can, because that dictates the rate they can get too.
Okay, and then the second question is, to me, it makes way more sense to have the older housing be more the affordable housing and the newer housing be the market rate, because there's a lot more money going into newer housing than older housing. Is there any discussion or flexibility on swapping, saying like, hey, a developer says, hey, I'm gonna somehow the older building that's a couple blocks away becomes affordable, get somehow, is there a swapping thing where you can actually like work together with, like, say a building's built 50 years ago and it was built for like a tenth or less of the cost? It makes a lot more sense if somebody's owned that for a long time for that to become affordable than the new one. Is there any way to swap or get the credits moved around at all?
Yeah, we actually looked at that very question. And there's a limit to there are state rules that outline what you can do in MFTE. And then we have to be consistent with that. And Stephanie, I'll ask our consultant, Stephanie Heinmarch, if she's available, we were looking at that as a potential option as well. Would MFTE, under the state rules, could we apply could we offer MFTE to a developer who's going to retrofit 35 units in some of these old apartment complexes? But there's a limit, you have to add new units. So in very few instances would we be able to apply MFTE to retrofitting the old. Stephanie, do you have any clarifications on that?
Yeah, I can just add, the MFT only applies to the net new units created. So if you were to renovate an existing building that has 10 units and add another 10 somehow, you could get the credit on the net 10 that was added. But you can't apply it to units that already exist. And you can also convert commercial industrial buildings to housing. If you're creating new units, you can get the credit in the target areas.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Anybody else? Go ahead.
So the town center, we'd remove that tax exemption for market rate. East Sumner, we'd expand the tax exemption for affordable to the entire neighborhood. The other strategy in the preferred alternative is to increase density in certain areas, not citywide. And again, increased density helps build housing capacity, which tends to even out the affordability of the housing stock. And the Kava mine site I just wanted to mention was something we looked at. Right now, this is the mine site right now, quarry, as you probably know. But once their state mining permit ends, could be 5 years, could be 20 years. They have a low density residential zoning designation. And one option we considered with the planning commission was to change that designation to a higher density, to medium density residential. And that will get us a number of new units. And of course, that comes with certain impacts, like, traffic and what happens on the intersection below the hill and, so on. But looking at that as an option, it was determined with the planning commission that we didn't need to increase density in this site in order to meet our housing targets. It's an option the council could consider, but the planning commission weighed that, and staff's recommendation was not increased density there. Another area where we're increasing density, and again, these are kind of strategic targeted areas. We're looking at allowing fourplex, which is a duplex, triplex, fourplex in the larger low density residential lots. So that's LDR 8.5 and LDR 12. And only on lots in those two zones if they're at least one and a half times the size of the minimum lot size. So to give you an idea, the zones we're talking about allowing multiplexes, so up to a fourplex, are the LDRs 8.5, which is this orange color, and LDR 12, which is a green color. And just so you're aware, LDR 8.5 means LDR minimum lot size 8,500 square feet. LDR 12 means minimum lot size 12,000 square feet. So those are our biggest lots for low density residential. And if you look at where these areas are, LDR 12 is pretty much up on the steep slopes, so there's limited development opportunity. Place now, which property?
North Parker Road.
Okay, yeah, North Parker Road, long, deep lots there. And of course, Salmon Creek is running along the base of the hillside. We have some other LDR 12 properties. Again, some other LDR 12 properties along the hillside that are kind of wetlands and steep slopes. And then if you'll notice where the orange is, that a lot of these areas are already developed. But there is potential over, we're looking at this 20-year horizon. So there's potential for some infill. And that's really what we were we were aiming at is we have a number of lots around town that are larger or they're deep, narrow lots. And so there's some infill potential for some small projects, some small fourplex, triplex projects, which, tend to fit well into the scale of the neighborhood. They tend to be the kinds of projects that local people, local owners could actually construct. So to give you an idea, again, the multiplex it's a single family, but they're all attached, and they're typically about 8 to 15 dwelling units per acre. Our single family zones are about 2 to 8 units per dwelling acre. So you can see there's almost a doubling in these targeted pocketed areas. There could be a doubling of density that's allowed. And we discussed with the Planning Commission requiring some of the units in the multiplexes to be affordable, but we determined that it's pretty onerous because these are probably going to be small developers, small lot development, and if you want to have affordable units, whoever owns those has to report. They have to do annual monitoring. They have to get income reports from their tenants if they have tenants. And they have to submit those to the city. The city has to submit those to the state. So it's it can be quite a burden to small property owners. So we decided not to request making those affordable at all. But a few fourplexes here and there we think would be a good way to get some infill projects that could provide a different type of single family home around the city. Another strategy in I'm sorry, any questions? Oh, sorry.
Going back to the mine site, when would you find out how many years they have rights? Because between 5 and 20 is quite a big range, and you need it in before 20 years if you're going to include it in your plan.
Yeah.
So we're in this round, we're not recommending rezoning it. We have communicated with Kava Mine site owners and let them know that this was an alternative. We also told them we didn't anticipate changing the zoning in this round, but wanted them to know that it was on the alternative list. They came back and said, we would be in favor of upzoning the area. In fact, when we have the site mined out and want to reclaim it, we're planning on asking for changes in density. And so, and the range is based on the demand for their material. And so they said the rate we're going right now, it might be 5 years, it might be 8 years, so it just kind of depends. So it might not be 20, but we don't really know. So we're gonna have to kind of wait and see.
Whenever they use up all the product.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions on? Any other questions? So another strategy and the preferred alternative is increasing the density in medium density residential zones. And so you get an idea of where those are in town. You can see we don't have a lot. It's this lime green color kind of scattered around town. A lot of it is north of Mason Street up in here. But the idea here again is that we could get some infill development in these medium density residential areas by going up to 22 dwelling units per acre. And when you look at the type of housing that comes in at 22 dwelling units per acre, we're really talking about townhomes and some small scale apartments. So just bumping up that density a little bit allows more opportunity for some of this, what we call middle housing. The single family types of homes typically attached to come in and just expands our housing stock for that kind of housing type in Sumner. And you probably all are familiar with what a townhome is, just typically 2 stories and single family attached. You might recall that I think it was a couple years ago, the council adopted what we call our zero lot line subdivision code. And And those are like townhomes with attached walls. But in that case, they own the ground underneath and they own a yard, maybe a side yard. And so it's a really nice alternative housing option for families getting into the housing market or for empty nesters, looking for an alternative type of housing. So the increase in density, we think it supports the strategy of getting these other housing types in, and it supports the strategy of getting some small apartment buildings. And so this is the kind of small apartment building we're talking about. Now, this is, in a way, this is not a great example because the density in this is really high because they don't have parking. They didn't have to build this store. This was built in 1922, was it? I think. Okay. Anyway, a long time ago, before we had our codes. But this gives you an idea of the scale when we say small apartments. They tend to fit into the neighborhood block. And they tend to be 15 to 22 dwelling units per acre. So that's why we want to increase the density in MDR slightly, just to allow that third story, those additional units. Any questions on density and increase? The other strategy, the preferred alternative, is looking at is what kinds of displacement provisions for low income people can we incorporate into our comprehensive plan policies and our code. And this is something else that's new. We're required to address this in our comprehensive plan. And displacement, as Ms. Cole was saying, there are a lot of different options, and we aren't offering a lot of different options to the council. And the preferred alternative, we tried to select just a couple of options that we think would work. And the main option we're looking at is to implement a manufactured home park protective zoning. And this could be an overlay zone or just a new zone in our code, a new zone on the map. And it's one of the most direct ways for Sumner to meet the state requirement because we have manufactured home parks here and they are low income. And I think a couple of them are 55 plus. And this type of protective zoning would only allow manufactured home parks on the 4 sites in Sumner. And the risk, you probably heard the stories, read the news where manufactured home parks are getting purchased, redeveloped into market rate apartments, or the rent goes up. So people who live in these manufactured home parks are quite vulnerable to being displaced. So we have the potential through this option to protect about 260 low-income people. So that's a lot of people in Sumner that that we could assist. Now, to be realistic, this does not do anything about a landlord's ability to increase the rents or the frequency with which the rents are increased and so on. But it is one mechanism to help address displacement. And what we're trying to do is prevent redevelopment into market rate housing. And we recognize it's going to limit options for the landowners. And it is an impact to the landowners. And we have in Rainier Manor, yes, that's a little different because the homeowners, I found out, own their own homes there. They own their own land versus the other manufactured home parks where people own their home, but they rent the land and pay utilities and so on. So we have an option to look at something like protective zoning for Rainier Manor. We work out the details in the code, but in principle, we're looking at people who own their homes but rent the land and are vulnerable. So we would have to contact owners for these 3 manufactured home parks. if that's what this would apply to. We have to go do some additional noticing and outreach to them. You had a question?
So isn't there another manufactured home park off of Riverside Drive? On the east side of 410,
Outside,
or east side of Valley.
yeah, it's
Oh.
outside the city limits.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it's an
Oh.
unincorporated Pierce County.
Towards,
They've got voters that voted for me. Or allegedly. I mean, I talked to some people in that area and I understood it was in the city.
That, if it's one we're talking about, which is a Riverside Drive, kind of right in
You know, right
the,
at the corner.
And
yeah,
then it
and
goes
then
down.
that's outside the city
Oh,
limits.
is it? Okay.
Not sure if they vote, hopefully they didn't vote for you.
At least they-
I had a question. Hey, you mentioned the displacement provisions and you had 260, we're protecting 260 houses. Is there numbers on, like, I know you had the chart of on the Growth Management Act of how many we have to add in certain tiers. Is there like a number that's the Sumner is supposed to protect in low income, or what, is that number important, that 260, that has anything to do with
Uh,
state requirements or?
yeah, good question. No, there are no statistics there that the state has given us saying we have to protect X number of people from displacement. The state said you must address it, you must plan, you must have displacement provisions in your code, you must have displacement policies. And then they've suggested different options such as restrictive ordinances that restrict landlords' eviction proceedings and require advance notice and require also setting aside funding for relocation assistance and so on. So there are a number of different provisions. There are also, I'm trying to think now, some of the different suggestions the state has put out there for all cities to look at. There's also the rehabilitation of homes. Sometimes people, their homes might become inhabitable because their roof is leaking and they need assistance. And so therefore they can afford to stay in their own home because now they have assistance fixing the plumbing, the roofing, getting an air conditioning unit, and so on. But no, there's no specific number.
And that number is basically the number of
Homes.
mobile homes, manufactured homes that are in the city.
Got
And
it.
most of them are in these 4 parks.
So there's no real specific guidelines, like they kind of just want us to protect low income, but really they want us to build low income more.
They don't want us to make the problem worse.
Yeah.
By
Displace.
yeah, by displacing affordable housing, they don't want,
Yeah.
it just adds to the problem, so. They want us to adopt policies that don't make the problem worse in there.
Got it. And for the owners of the manufactured park, is there like a state, would we have to buy their development rights if we're gonna force them to keep it in the same zoning, or is that something we just get to take from them? I mean, because a lot of times farmers have the same issue come up. People are like, I want to protect farmland, and the
Yeah.
farmers are like, hey, this is my retirement, and you just stole it from me.
Yeah.
And so it
Well-
seems like the same type of issue. Is there like
Yeah.
something like that deal?
Yeah, I think that is definitely something that we have to be aware of, are the legal ramifications of this. Other cities have done this, and the city council has the legal authority to rezone property. And of course, there's due process and due notice and that kind of thing. But I'd be surprised if it weren't opening us to some legal challenge. But it is not unheard of. And in fact, many of the strategies that we have to look at are going to be painful for one side of the equation or the other.
Thank you. I think, and the only thing I think I heard from the consultant that I appreciated was just taking like a commercial building and turning it into housing is an option. So you're essentially changing use and it counts as new dwelling units. I don't want to talk about it too much tonight, but I would love to hear about like if a manufactured home park was changed of use to something different, or if you had we have a lot of housing stock in Sumner that is aged multifamily that if it was changed use from multifamily to senior housing, is that considered a new dwelling unit? I mean, so the idea of the change of use, I'd love to hear more about that and just hear about options. I think those options would be really interesting to me.
Okay, and I would say another, another option of to the protective zoning, there's different details in this that could be worked out in the code, but one option we've got out here on the table is have this protective zoning that tells the property owner you can never change this from a manufactured home park. Another option might be to say you can only change it from a manufactured home park to a low-income apartment development in which you first offer the apartments to the tenants that exist there. And some other cities have done that. Stephanie, if you're there and available, did you say we could apply MFTE to a commercial or industrial development that not that a developer would want to do that, but would that be an option? Would the state allow that under MFTE?
Yeah, we can convert buildings to residential that are not currently residential. And as long as you're adding units and you're in the target area, those qualify as well.
And again, Stephanie, to clarify that if we had a market rate, maybe substandard apartment complex, old apartment complex, substandard, they could, but say it's market rate, an owner could renovate that, create low income only. And would that qualify, or do they have to actually add units?
They have to add units, so the total number has to be higher than what it was before, and you only get the exemption on the net that you added. So if there were 20 and there were 20 when you start and 20 when you end, you wouldn't qualify. But if you add, I think, at least 4 units, you would qualify on those.
Thank you, Stephanie. So that would be something we could build some of that flexibility into the MFTE code. But there are going to be limited opportunities for using that tax incentive for existing.
And does it include senior housing, is that correct?
Senior income, that's one option for multifamily tax exemption, but we have already built incentives for senior housing into our code with some pretty significant density bonuses and height bonuses. So there's nothing in the state requirements that say you have to build senior housing, but they say you have to build, or they say you have to accommodate affordable housing. So that's, and a lot of times those are one and the same. But our target is affordable.
In the mobile home parks that we have now, if something happens to their mobile home, are they allowed to put in another one in, new or whatever?
Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Barbara.
So what if there's a utility that is not up to standards? You know, is the city responsible at all for that, or if you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know which case you're talking about, and if it's a city-owned utility, then yes, we are responsible for maintaining it. But if it's a private utility that is owned by a group of homeowners, for example,
Right.
or a mobile home park, we are not responsible for maintaining.
Okay, is there any way to change it so that they would become a city utility?
Yes, there is. It'd be through a utility LID process. And
But they would have to pay.
right, it would actually, they would have to pay for that through an assessment.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you.
Anybody else?
I just have a comment. So, do you know, if a cap has been put on the lot rent by the state yet for mobile home parks? There had not been the last time I checked, there was no cap. So a senior could go in saying they're paying $200 a month lot rent. They buy their mobile home, they retire, buy their mobile home, put it there thinking it's $200 a month. Within 4 years, it can be $1,500 a month. That's happening up in King County a lot. So as you're talking about this, it's really, what's resonating with me is it potentially could be more affordable
if somehow the mobile home parks could be created into more of a affordable housing type apartments or something. I'm trying to figure out the impact on the developer. But it could be more affordable for the senior or the low income person because they wouldn't end up with that huge jump in the lot rent. So I was just wondering if you knew about the cap.
Yeah. I am not aware that has passed. I'm aware more of the stories around the state,
Mm-hmm.
those rent increases and frequency of those increases. So one strategy is to have some kind of a rent control, which the city doesn't have the resources to get into. And there are other agencies that can address those rent issues. But I think the other difference you're talking about is who the landlord is. And if the landlord is an agency, and we have some senior housing providers around the area, if they provide, I can't say this for sure, but generally they build housing and the rents are pretty stable. But if you're talking about a private landowner, those are what I typically hear as situations where the rent goes up pretty dramatically and pretty frequently. So if we were to have something in our code that puts a protective zoning on manufactured home parks, but says you could also perhaps be an agency that provides affordable housing, a regional housing authority, for example, you could come in and build low-income apartments there. So the landowner maybe sells their property to one of these agencies. So we could look at details like that in the code.
Thank you.
I just thought I'd mention, we actually touched on some of these already. We talked with the Planning Commission about adopting ordinances for relocation assistance and certain noticing requirements to let the tenants know, giving them the first option to purchase and so on. And we found that it was probably going to be too difficult for the city of Sumner to manage that. And there are other agencies that probably take that on a little better. And then we also looked at non-regulatory types of strategies. Could the city, through all of our media resources and social media, could we somehow disseminate information and promote programs by the county and other agencies that assist tenants? And we determined that we would not recommend that either, because while it might seem to be a low cost opportunity for the city, we just would not be the ones in the forefront of what's the most updated information, who exactly does what, which, when agency roles change and so on. And there are again, a lot of agencies out there who have this role already. And, as long as someone has internet access, there are a lot of resources out there, not to diminish their, situations they might be in that are difficult, but other agencies are better suited to take on that role of providing information. So this is where I'm going to go back to the ask of City Council. We're looking to get City Council direction on the preferred alternative. We think what I've just described to you meets the state requirements for housing and for hitting those affordable income bands. It meets the state and regional requirements for including new policies about displacement and climate change and best available science. And we think that the preferred alternatives recommended is the best one to meet the state requirements. And I want to stress that this isn't a final decision when I'm asking you for feedback and direction. This is not a final decision such as, oh, yes, I think we should have this protected manufactured home park, or I definitely want to have MDR be increased to 22 dwelling units per acre. We're not holding you to that because this will come back to you and you'll have the ability to hear more of the details of how that's actually going to work. But we do want some certainty about the strategy. Does this sound like the right combination of strategies relative to housing that we can pursue and get through the planning commission, fine tune the policies and regulations, and then come back to you? So any, oops, go ahead.
One question I have, so you keep saying preferred alternative, but it's a preferred alternative to what? You know what?
Welcome to planning.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? So I mean, is there, and that, you don't have to give me like hours and hours of explanation, but because I was on the planning commission for a while,
Yes.
that's what I said to Andy. I said, boy, this is really, coming forward and you guys have been working this a while.
Yeah.
So for me personally, I think it looks very good, but I'm thinking, what's the preferred alternative to what? So,
Well, yes, and that is, that is in the planning world. And it's even not the comprehensive plan, it's in the world of environmental impact statement. So it gets even further away from what normal people
it's okay.
deal with.
I'm good.
So the preferred alternative is out of the three alternatives in the draft EIS that focus mainly on what's the good combination of housing strategies to get us to these numbers. Out of those three alternatives, one is do nothing, which won't get us to meet the state requirements. So it's really out of alternative 2 and alternative 3, which are pretty similar. Which of those two would be the preferred one? And the nuance here is the preferred alternative that staff and the planning commission are recommending is kind of a hybrid of these two. So that's why it's called preferred alternative.
So at the end of your presentation, there's an appendix or a reference section that actually
Mhm.
lists alternative 2 and 3, all the things that were parts of those. And as Ann mentioned, elements of 2 and 3 create this preferred alternative. And the planning commission looked at all the alternatives and that's how they came up with the hybrid.
Got it. Thank you.
Any questions?
Well, since I was a big part of the planning commission doing this, I think I'm pretty happy with the outcome. I don't love the state mandates. I don't like some of the directions, but I do think the way that there's pretty good discussion on some of them. Some of it is very unpleasant. I think it's going to create some issues in the future, not solve as many problems as we're hoping to solve, but I do like the preferred alternative that you presented with the mix of those things. I thought that was very thoughtful. And I after having lots and lots of hours of discussion over the last in 2023, I think that was it looks pretty good to me.
I, from what I heard and read, I thought it was a really, really good combination of strategies that were in here. So I really like the idea. I love that there was a lot of public outreach. That was all throughout there, which I thought was really good. And of course, I really well, not of course, but I like the displacement provisions that you have, which there are more, but I like those. So I'm in favor.
Greg, did you have something?
Not really. I mean, I'm good with the alternative hybrid 2 to 3. I'm still trying to figure out the difference. I'm trying to find them. You said it was at the end or something?
Yeah, at the end of the presentation, there's reference slides.
Just so you in the,
Page 33, like 32, 33.
Okay, yeah, I just want to look at the differences, but I'm in favor of the hybrid proposition, I guess, or alternative right now. Thank you.
Kurt, do you have any feedback for this? You good with the preferred? Are you good with what they're? That's good enough.
Mhm.
I'd go with the preferred.
You good?
Okay.
You guys? All right.
Good job.
Great. Thank you for your patience. That was good, a lot of good discussion. So we'll, now that we have your direction, we will continue with the planning commission review. They haven't made their final recommendations yet. We've gotten through a lot of the comprehensive plan chapters. And so we'll get through the planning commission review, and then we'll come back to the city council and start bringing these sections of materials to you and try to finish up by the end of December. So,
Thanks, Ann. Thanks for all your work on this.
great. Thanks very much.
All right, city administrator report.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one thing, Music Off Main starts this Friday at Heritage Park, 6 p.m. The first band performing is Victims of Love, which is an Eagles tribute band. There'll be some food trucks down there too, so come out. It's gonna be warm again and hot, so bring some water and some shade. Enjoy the concert.
Council meeting agenda. Anybody have any issues with any of the upcoming meetings? Carla.
I won't be here Monday.
I'm traveling, but I'm gonna see if I can do remote.
You need your card.
On August 5th, but I'll try to tune in.
We're all gonna be in their cars, Jason, so,
It's easier that way.
all right.
We don't have one on the 29th, I'm assuming, is it 5 Mondays? Right.
Yeah, no meeting on July 29th.
Okay, are there any issues with committee meetings for anybody?
I got my back replacements.
You
Yeah.
already did yours?
Yeah.
Good work. Nice.
Greg
Alright.
and Kurt.
With that being said, everything done? I will adjourn this meeting at 7:00.